The wind howled through the towering pines as Eleanor Hartley guided her tired mule up the narrow mountain trail, praying that the old maps she'd studied were right, praying that somewhere beyond these jagged cliffs and whispering forests, there was a cabin where she could finally stop running from the life that had swallowed her dreams whole, a place where she could breathe again without feeling the weight of years pressing on her shoulders. 45 years old, newly widowed, stripped of every identity she once held, teacher, wife, caretaker, and left with nothing but a heart that beat too quietly for a world that moved too fast. Snowflakes clung to her eyelashes as she muttered to herself that she was too old for such foolish journeys, too old to be searching for a reason to live again, too old for the childish ache that whispered she still wanted to be seen, still wanted someone to look at her like she was more than the fading remnant of who she used to be. But somewhere deep within these mountains lived a man people in town only spoke about in lowered voices, a rugged recluse with a beard like wildfire and eyes like winter steel, a man they called Rowan Hale, the mountain man of Blackthorn Ridge, who, rumor had it, saved lost hikers, tracked wounded animals like a ghost, and carried a loneliness so old and so heavy that even the wind avoided brushing too close to him. She didn't come here looking for him, she told herself. She simply needed a place to breathe, a place untouched by the memories that followed her like shadows. But destiny had a way of pulling two wounded souls together when they least expected it, and as Eleanor's mule slipped on a patch of ice, sending her tumbling onto the cold ground with a cry that echoed into the silent trees, she didn't see the tall figure emerging from the mist, boots crunching in the snow, a cloak draped over broad shoulders, dark hair tied at the back, and eyes that softened in an instant when they landed on her. Rowan stepped forward like he'd been waiting at the edge of the world for this exact moment, kneeling beside her with hands gentle, enough to calm a frightened doe, yet strong enough to lift her without effort. His voice deep and warm as he whispered, "Easy now. I've got you." She tried to push herself upright, embarrassed, flustered, too aware of her worn clothes, her graying hair tucked beneath her hood, the fine lines around her mouth that spoke of years spent worrying instead of living. But he steadied her with a touch that felt like safety. She thought she'd never feel again. And when she met his eyes, the world seemed to hush, the snow paused mid-air, and the ache inside her chest cracked wide open. I'm fine," she managed, though her voice trembled. "I'm simply too old for this. Too old for adventures. Too old for—" She hesitated, swallowing words she had never meant to say out loud. "Too old for love." Rowan froze, his breath forming soft clouds in the icy air as something in his gaze sharpened, deepened, warmed like embers beneath snow. He cupped her face with a tenderness that startled her to her core, and said in a low, certain voice that rolled through her like thunder, "I've been waiting for you." A shiver raced through her, not from the cold, but from the knowing in his tone, the conviction that made her knees weak as he wrapped his cloak around her shoulders and guided her through the trees to his hidden cabin, a place carved from cedar and solitude, glowing from within by the firelight that flickered like a heartbeat. Inside, the air smelled of pine resin, smoke, and something utterly Rowan, something warm and wild and achingly safe, as he tended to her sprained ankle with hands that lingered just enough to send warmth rushing up her leg. She found herself watching him, how the firelight danced across his jawline, how the faint scars on his forearms told stories he didn't speak of, how he glanced at her as though afraid she might vanish if he looked away. "Why would someone like you wait for someone like me?" she whispered, unable to keep the tremor from her voice. Rowan's reply rumbled through the cabin like distant thunder. "Because the world took too long to bring you back to me." And as she stared at him, dazed and breathless, she didn't realize that everything she had ever feared, her age, her past, her grief, melted into irrelevance beneath the intensity of the mountain man who saw her not as fading, not as broken, but as the one thing his lonely heart had been searching for all these years. Outside, the storm roared. Inside, something new, something ancient, began to grow between them, fragile yet fierce, as Rowan pulled a blanket over her shoulders and murmured, "Rest! You're safe here," unaware that the night ahead would unravel secrets, awaken longing, and ignite a love powerful enough to set the mountains trembling. Dawn broke slowly over Blackthorn Ridge, painting the mountain tops with strokes of gold and rose as Eleanor blinked awake beneath Rowan's heavy wool blanket, the warmth of the cabin settling over her like a second skin, grounding her in the strange, comforting reality that she was still here, still in the mountain man's home, still wrapped in the scent of pine and wood smoke, still alive in a way she hadn't felt in years. And as her eyes fluttered open, she found Rowan already awake, sitting near the crackling fire, sharpening a hunting blade with slow, thoughtful strokes his broad shoulders, relaxed but his expression carrying the quiet intensity of a man who had spent the entire night listening for danger, watching over her as if guarding something precious. For a moment she simply watched him, taking in the way the morning light caressed the rugged line of his jaw, the way his dark hair fell around his face, the way his eyes softened every time he glanced her, way as though reassuring himself she was real. When he finally spoke, his voice was low, warm, threaded with a gentleness she never believed such a towering man could possess. "Did you sleep well?" She swallowed, surprised by the flutter of nerves in her chest. "Better than I have in a long time." Rowan set the blade aside, wiping metal shavings from his hands as he approached her with a slow, deliberate step that made her heart knock against her ribs. And when he crouched beside her, brushing a loose strand of hair from her cheek, she felt heat rise to her face like a girl half her age. "Good," he murmured, "because today you'll see the part of this mountain that belongs to no one but you and me." She blinked, confused, and he offered his hand, helping her to her feet with a tenderness that made her breath hitch. He wrapped his thick fur cloak around her shoulders, not because she was cold, but because he couldn't stand the thought of her feeling unprotected. For even a moment, and guided her outside, into the crisp morning air. The world felt different now, brighter, sharper, softer all at once, as though Rowan's presence had changed the shape of the mountains themselves. They walked slowly, her ankle still fragile, his arm steadying her at every step, and she couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't simply kindness, nor obligation nor duty. Rowan walked beside her like a man, walking with the woman he had found after a lifetime of searching. "Why do you keep looking at me like that?" she whispered, heart fluttering. Rowan stopped, turning fully to face her, his breath forming pale clouds in the cold. "Because I'm afraid if I look away." He reached out, cupping her cheek with a calloused palm that sent warmth flooding through her. "You'll disappear." And that was when she realized something in him had shifted, or perhaps something long dormant had awakened. Rowan wasn't merely fascinated by her. He was drawn to her, anchored to her, and the more she felt it, the more it terrified her, because she wasn't young, wasn't flawless, wasn't a woman untouched by grief or time, and she feared he would see the truth of her and pull away. "Rowan," she said, voice trembling, "I told you yesterday I'm too old for love. Too old for someone like you to—" But her words died as he stepped closer, the heat of his body warming her even through the cloak. "Eleanor," he whispered, lowering his forehead to hers. "Age has nothing to do with the heart. Mine chose you before I knew your name." Her breath caught. "But why?" Rowan exhaled, as if releasing a truth he had held for years. "Because I've lived half my life in silence, in shadows, in the company of trees and storms. And the first moment I saw you lying in the snow, something inside me, something I thought had died, woke up and reached for you." Before she could respond, the forest rustled, branches snapping, birds scattering, and Rowan shifted instantly, pulling her behind him with a protective growl rumbling deep in his chest. She barely had time to gasp before a figure emerged from the trees, wiry, bearded, eyes sharp with resentment and recognition. "Rowan Hale," the stranger spat. "Didn't expect to find you keeping company." Rowan's muscles coiled like a wolf ready to strike. Eleanor sensed tension, history, danger swirling between the two men. "Leave," Rowan said, voice dropping into a warning tone that froze the air around them. But the stranger only smirked. "Not until I get what I came for." Rowan stepped forward, blocking Eleanor from view entirely, the mountain man's protective instinct flaring like wildfire. And in that moment, watching him shield her with his entire body, she understood. She had walked into the life of a man who would fight the world to keep her safe. A man who had claimed her without touching her. A man who had been waiting not just for a woman, but for her. And the mountains were about to reveal why. Subscribe our YouTube channel